The desert sun bled across the endless plains like molten copper, spilling its heat onto a land that had long since forgotten mercy. Dust swirled in the wind, carrying with it the whispers of cattle herds, wagon wheels, and gunfire from distant towns where men settled their disputes with pistols quicker than words. It was the Wild West, and survival wasn't a promise. It was a wager, and most lost more than they won. Elias Boone, a rancher of 35 years, sat high in the saddle of his bay gelding Scout. His wide-brimmed hat shielded his eyes from the blazing sky, but it did little against the gnawing loneliness that came with the land. The Boone Ranch lay 2 days' ride from the nearest town of Dry Creek, and though Elias was no stranger to solitude, the silence had begun to weigh heavier since the death of his wife 2 winters ago. He was a man made of leather and grit, with hands scarred from barbed wire and branding irons, and eyes as sharp as a hawk's. Folks in town said Elias Boone was married to the land, and maybe they were right. But even land, stubborn and dry as it was, gave back more warmth than the grave had. That morning, Elias rode out to mend a section of fence that had been broken, likely by a wandering steer or maybe a pack of coyotes. He'd expected a long, hot day with nothing but dust for company. What he found instead was something he could not have prepared for, not in all his years of hard living. The wind shifted, carrying with it a faint sound. Not cattle, not coyote. Human, a weak, ragged moan. Elias reined Scout to a halt, his body stiffening like a hunting dog catching scent. He scanned the horizon. There, off by the dry wash near a cluster of mesquite bushes, lay a bundle. At first, Elias thought it was just an abandoned bedroll, maybe left behind by a drifter too drunk to remember his gear. But then the bundle moved. He dismounted, boots crunching against the brittle earth, his right hand instinctively brushing against the Colt on his hip. Life on the frontier taught him caution. Too many times, bait was set for a trap. He approached slow, eyes sharp, muscles ready. The blanket shifted again, and a faint voice, raw and broken, leaked out, "Just kill me fast." Elias froze. It was a woman's voice, weak, trembling, soaked in despair. He knelt and pulled back the edge of the blanket. What he saw made his stomach lurch, and for a man who had seen death and blood more times than he cared to count, that was saying something. Beneath the coarse fabric was a woman, barely more than a girl, her face battered and bruised, lips split, one eye swollen shut. Her dress, what little remained of it, was torn to shreds, dirt and blood staining every inch of her. But worse than the injuries was the look in her eyes. Hollow, shattered. She had been broken, not just in body but in spirit. "Jesus," Elias muttered, stumbling back for the briefest moment, his hand gripping his hat as though the brim might steady the storm in his chest. The woman coughed, her whole body trembling. "Please, don't drag it out. Just kill me fast." Her words hit him harder than a rifle shot. Elias Boone was no savior. He'd buried too many folks to pretend he had the power to save anyone. But something about the plea in her voice clawed deep into him. "No," he said firmly, his voice low but steady. "Ain't no killing gonna be done here today." Her one good eye narrowed, filled with a kind of mistrust that only came from hellish betrayal. Men always lie. Elias exhaled slowly, fighting the anger boiling in him, not at her, but at whoever had left her in this state. He wrapped his coat around her frail shoulders and lifted her gently. She weighed almost nothing, like a sack of bones. As he hoisted her onto Scout, he whispered more to himself than to her. "Whoever did this, they'll answer for it." The long ride home, the journey back to the Boone Ranch, felt longer than any cattle drive. Elias rode slow, careful not to jostle the broken girl too much. Her head rested against his chest, and he could feel the heat of fever burning through her skin. At times she muttered incoherent words. Names, maybe, or please. Once, she whispered, "Don't take me back," with such raw terror that Elias nearly pulled Scout to a stop, half wondering if he should ride toward town instead. But the thought of dragging her through another 20 miles of desert roads with that fever made his decision clear. Home first, doctor second. By the time the ranch house came into view, the sky had begun to bleed purple with dusk. The place wasn't much. 2 stories of weathered timber, a barn leaning with age, corrals that looked held together by stubbornness alone. But to Elias, it was sanctuary. He carried the girl inside, laying her on the bed in the room that had once belonged to his wife, Clara. His chest tightened at the thought, but he pushed it aside. Now wasn't the time for ghosts. He lit a lamp, fetched water from the well, and began cleaning her wounds. The gashes on her arms and legs told a cruel story. Rope burns, lash marks, bruises painted her ribs in angry purples and blacks. Elias had seen cattle whipped less harshly. When he tried to wash the blood from her face, her eyes flicked open and she flinched, whispering, "No, no, please, no more. It's all right," Elias said gently, his voice softer than it had been in years. "Ain't nobody here gonna hurt you. Not while I'm standin'." For the first time, she looked at him, not just with suspicion, but with a flicker of something else. A spark, fragile as a candle in the wind, a name in the darkness hours later. When the fever had eased enough for her to speak, Elias sat by her bedside. The night outside was thick with coyotes calling across the plains, but inside the small ranch house, only the creak of the rocking chair broke the silence. "Got a name?" Elias asked finally, her lips parted dry and cracked. "Anna." He nodded slowly. "Anna? Well, you're safe here, Anna. That much I promise." Her throat worked as though swallowing stones. "Safe doesn't exist." Elias leaned forward, his eyes hard. "Maybe not out there, but here, under this roof. You got my word." She closed her eyes, tears leaking from the corners. "They'll come for me?" Ooh. She hesitated, as though the very act of speaking might summon monsters from the shadows. "Outlaws, the Graves brothers." Elias stiffened. He knew the name. Everyone in the territory did. The Graves gang was a pack of killers, worse than wolves, leaving trails of bodies wherever they rode. If Anna had escaped them, then she wasn't just broken, she was hunted. Elias exhaled slowly, his hand brushing the worn handle of the Colt at his side. His life had been quiet since Clara's death, his battles fought with cattle and fences instead of guns and blood. But now the storm had found him again. He looked at the girl, her face half lit by lamplight, and made a choice. "Let him come," he muttered. And for the first time in years, Elias Boone felt something stir in his chest that he thought had died with his wife. Purpose. The night ride, but the Graves brothers didn't wait for dawn. Just after midnight, a scout's nervous whinny woke Elias from the chair by Anna's bed. He moved to the window, hand already on his gun. The moon cast a pale light across the ranch yard, and in it, Elias saw movement, shadows slipping between the barn and the corral. "Outlaws." He turned back to Anna. She was awake, eyes wide with terror. "They found me," she whispered. Elias tightened his jaw. "Stay down. Don't make a sound." She grabbed his hand with surprising strength. "You can't fight them all. Watch me." He slipped outside, the night air sharp against his skin. The desert was alive with silence, the kind that pressed on a man's ears until even his heartbeat felt too loud. 3 figures emerged from the dark, rifles glinting in the moonlight. Elias recognized one, Jed Graves, the oldest brother, a brute with a scar running down his jaw. Well, Jed drawled, his voice dripping malice. "Looks like the Boone ranch picked up strays." Elias raised his Colt. "You boys ain't welcome here." Jed chuckled. "That girl don't belong to you, she belongs to us." Elias's thumb pulled back the hammer with a metallic click that cut the night in half. "She belongs to no man." The standoff stretched thin, like a rope ready to snap. Then, without warning, a rifle cracked. The fight had begun. The first rifle crack split the night wide open. Elias Boone dove behind the water trough, bullets chewing splinters from the wood. The Graves brothers didn't bother with words anymore. They came with gunfire, hot and merciless, like wolves closing in for the kill. From inside the ranch house, Anna let out a strangled cry, muffled quickly behind her hands. Elias grit his teeth, steadying his Colt. He'd seen fights like this before, ambushes under moonlight where one mistake bought a pine box. He drew in a long breath, then leaned from cover and squeezed the trigger. The Colt barked flame. One outlaw spun and dropped near the corral, his rifle clattering uselessly against the dirt. 2 left. Jed Graves snarled like a cornered coyote. "Boone, you're digging your own grave protecting that girl." Elias ducked back as lead punched into the trough, water spilling out in a dark gush. His jaw tightened. "Better men've tried to bury me." The brothers spread out, boots crunching low against the sand. Elias fired again, forcing one to scramble behind the barn. He could hear them breathing, whispering curses in the dark. They weren't amateurs. They were patient killers. But Elias Boone had patience too. Anna's choice inside. Anna trembled on the bed. Every shot outside was a thunderclap in her skull. She knew those men, Jed, Caleb, and Luke Graves. Monsters dressed in dust and leather. They'd stolen her from our family's wagon weeks ago, keeping her alive for reasons that made her stomach twist. She had escaped by miracle, crawling from their camp when they were too drunk to notice. She hadn't expected to live another day, and when Boone found her, she thought she'd stumbled from one hell into another. But now she heard him fighting for her, alone. Her eyes darted to the rifle on the wall above the hearth. Trembling, she rose from the bed, clutching the blanket to her body. Each step burned, each breath a knife, but she forced herself onward. She pulled the rifle down, the weight nearly toppling her. She had never fired one before, not properly, but tonight she would learn, or die trying. The ranch ablaze outside, the fight grew dirtier. Luke Graves, the youngest, dashed toward the barn with a torch in hand. Flames licked dry hay, catching fast. Within moments, fire roared to life, painting the yard in savage orange. Elias cursed under his breath. Fire was deadlier than bullets out here. He dropped Luke with a clean shot to the chest, but the barn was already a pyre. Horses screamed inside, kicking against the stalls. Elias sprinted forward, pulling open the doors. Smoke poured out, choking him, but he grabbed reins blindly, leading two terrified horses into the night air. The rest, God help him, he couldn't save them all. When he stumbled back into the yard, Jed was waiting. The outlaw leveled a shotgun, grinning through firelight. "That girl's mine, Boone. Step aside, and maybe I'll let you live." Elias lifted his Colt, his hand steady despite the flames. "I don't bargain with trash." Jed's grin widened. "Then die with her." The shotgun roared, but another shot cracked from the ranch house window. The bullet struck Jed in the shoulder, spinning him into the dirt. Elias glanced back in shock. There was Anna, pale as a ghost, gripping the rifle with shaking hands. For the first time, her voice rang out clear and fierce across the flames. "You'll never take me again." The last brother, Jed, staggered to his knees, cursing. His left arm hung useless, blood darkening his shirt. He spat into the dirt, eyes burning with hate. "Girls got bite," he rasped. "Reckon I'll enjoy breaking her all over again." Elias felt something snap inside him. Rage, cold and sharp as a whetted blade. He walked forward, gun raised, each step measured. Jed fumbled for his revolver, but Elias was quicker. The Colt's shot thundered, and Jed Graves toppled lifeless into the dust. For a long moment, the only sounds were fire crackling and horses whinnying in panic. The Graves gang was finished. But the ranch was half in ruins, and Anna was trembling in the doorway, rifle slipping from her grasp. Elias caught her before she collapsed, lowering her gently. "You did good," he murmured. Her lips quivered. "I killed a man." Elias's jaw tightened. "You defended yourself. Don't you let that guilt eat you." Graves' brothers had death coming a long time. In ashes and morning light by dawn, the fire had burned out, leaving the barn a blackened skeleton. Elias buried the bodies in shallow graves beyond the corral. He didn't say prayers. Men like the Graves didn't earn them. When he returned to the house, Anna sat at the table, wrapped in his coat. She looked small, but her eyes, though weary, held more steel than the night before. "Why'd you save me?" she asked. Elias poured her water, then leaned against the counter. "'Cause no one else would." "That's not reason enough." He studied her a moment. "Maybe it ain't, but it's the one I got." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the creak of the old house. Finally, Anna whispered, "They killed my family. My ma left their bodies on the trail. I thought I'd never see morning again." Elias felt his throat tighten. He knew loss. He knew it too well. "You'll see plenty more mornings," he said softly, "long as I'm breathing." The sheriff's warning. 2 days later, Sheriff Marlowe rode out from Dry Creek, a weathered man with a gray mustache and eyes like worn stone. Marlowe had kept the county from tearing itself apart for near 20 years. He listened as Elias told the story, his gaze flicking to Anna, who sat silent at the hearth. Graves' brothers were wanted in 3 states. Marlowe said finally, "Won't be a tear shed over him. But Boone," he leaned closer, "you just painted a target on your back. Graves weren't lone wolves. They ran with bigger packs. Word gets out you killed Jed and his kin. Every outlaw worth his spurs'll come sniffin' for revenge. Elias's jaw tightened. Let sniff. I'll be waitin'. Marlowe sighed, pulling his hat low. Switch yourself. Just don't say I didn't warn ya. When the sheriff rode off, Elias stood a long while on the porch, staring at the horizon. Trouble was coming. He could feel it in his bones. A fragile peace in the weeks that followed. Anna began to heal. The bruises faded, the cuts closed. She helped mend fences, cooked simple meals, even laughed once or twice. But the shadows in her eyes never left. Sometimes Elias caught her staring into the distance, lips moving as though whispering to ghosts. Other times, he'd wake in the night to her screams, her body racked with terror until he soothed her back to calm. And though he said little, Elias found himself growing protective in ways he hadn't expected. The ranch had been silent for too long, now it carried two voices again. But peace was a brittle thing in the West, and it never lasted. Blood on the horizon one evening, as the sun bled low over the plains, Anna spotted riders in the distance. 6 of them, black silhouettes against the fire-red sky. Her breath hitched. They've come. Elias stepped onto the porch, eyes narrowing. The riders carried rifles across their saddles, dust trailing like banners behind them. He rested a hand on his colt, his voice steady. Get inside, Anna. She clutched his arm. You can't fight them all. Elias's gaze never left the horizon. Maybe not. But I can make remember my name. The riders closed in, hooves drumming like thunder. The West held its breath. The war for Anna's survival and Elias Boone's soul was about to begin.